Depression and suicide is not an uncommon thing, and it is something that people should be aware of and should know the steps to look for and the things you can do to help someone you think is suffering from depression. If someone you know is suffering from depression or is thinking of suicide or self-harm, please take the steps I do go over in this speech to try and get help. Some things I did learn through the information that kind of struck me were that girls are more likely to attempt suicide, but boys actually commit suicide more often because of their violent tendencies. But either way, anyone who has a mindset of suicide is at risk to not only themselves but others. Also, students or students whose parents have a substance abuse are more likely to attempt suicide. And you should always remember, people who are genuinely suicidal don't always look suicidal or look depressed. Depression is actually an imbalance of chemicals in your brain, so if you do suffer from depression, don't think it's like you're out of place or it's your fault, because it is a disorder that you really most of the time can't help. It's the chemicals in your brain, norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine. Some notable signs you can look for in yourself or in others are noticeable change in eating and sleeping habits, which I will go over some of those in a little bit, like anorexia and bulimia, which often friends and family, persistent boredom, declining quality schoolwork is a big one, violent or rebellious behavior, but you should also know how to differentiate rebellious behavior from like teens experimenting and rebellious behavior as a sign of depression. Drug or alcohol abuse, and a huge one is radical personality changes. If you feel or notice any of these, talk to someone or find someone that you trust, or you know someone else will feel open talking to. Depression is not something you should just let slide. If you feel depressed, don't ignore it, and if you think someone else is severely depressed, don't ignore that either. If it's difficult talking or interacting with others, try and find someone you really trust. And not all of the time that's going to be your best friend or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your family member, so you always do have your counselor at school. And if someone is trying to open up to you, be sure you listen and sympathize and don't ignore them, and encourage them to keep persistently talking to you, and then notify an adult and be as supportive as you can. The chemicals associated with depression, I already kind of went over this, the dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. I think I said that wrong. They're all neurotransmitters in your brain, and depression can be, or any kind of disorder, I'll get to the different types of those too, any type of mental disorder can be through genetics, or it can be caused from stress, anxiety, anything that develops. 1 in 5 adolescents actually have a mental disorder, so always know you're not alone. But what's really sad is only 2/3 of all young people that do suffer from these aren't getting the help that they need. The most common forms of illnesses are anxiety, depression, ADHD, that's attention deficit disorder. There's seasonal depression, clinical depression, and then it goes off into things like sleeping disorders, anorexia, bulimia, all things that do need to be treated. I did get this information from my health class again. My health teacher, Tim Reppy, he was a big help to me. Most of the information and the packets are from the United States Department of Health and Human Services. And another, one of the articles or the books that I read was from a child adolescent psychiatrist with the Human Development Center, and his name is Steve Sutherland. There is actually a self-examination you can take to see if you are feeling depressed or if you have the signs of depression, and that's called the Zung Depression Scale. But to be sure that you are matching those things with the questions on the scale, you want to be sure that you're basing your emotions over a 2-week period, so it's not just all mood you're going through. It's actually something that's affecting your life, and it's persistent. Questions that are on the Zung Depression Scale are questions like, I'm feeling downhearted and blue, Mornings when I feel best. I have trouble sleeping at night. I'm restless and can't sit still. My life is pretty full. I enjoy the things I used to do. Or I feel hopeful about the future. There's a question like that, and then there's 4 answers or answer keys you can mark off, and I still enjoy the things I do. I feel hopeful about the future. There are 4 answers. Oh, sorry. Feel hopeful about the future. Yeah, I went over those 4. Oh, the 4 slots are a little of the time, some of the time, a good part of the time, and most of the time. I do have a zone scale here. And I do have, oh wait, this is the grading scale. I was just going to go over that. And then this is the Zung depression scale, which, talking to my health teacher, I think administration for schools are actually going to start trying to hand these out, or have it survey that students are supposed to be taking. On this it actually says 50 to 69 of a score is most people who are depressed are in that range. 70 plus is severe depression, so that is clinical depression. I was actually going to get to that in a little bit. Clinical depression is more of a severe depression. That is where most people start to commit suicide. There's several different types of things or precautions, and there's different types of methods you can use for treatment. There's the pills, which restore the chemical balance in your brain. Again, that dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. There's also a more intense things, like there's actually treatment I read about, and it actually sends shocks to your brain, which induces seizures to try and balance that back out. And then there's things like treatment and therapy and everything. And I know a lot of, especially adolescents, are like, oh, therapy, why would I need to do that? But it actually, the statistics say that it is improvement, and talking to someone is probably the best thing you can do. Things that cause depression can be genetics of stress, being bullied at school, not having self-worth, and then those result in things like eating disorders, bulimia, which is where you binge or you make yourself vomit, and then anorexia, where you barely eat at all or you eat nothing. Forgot there was. There's also the thing, seasonal depression, which is most of the time people get it in the winter because of the lack of sun. So sometimes you go on pills for that, but sometimes you can just up your vitamin D. Also, anxiety disorder, where you get really worked up and like a nervousness about a test or something, but it's more persistent. It's that feeling, but a lot more throughout your life, or you get nervous in big crowds. That can be through, you can find treatment through pills, therapy, or just finding ways to reduce stress as well, like exercising, breathing deeply. One other thing I was going to share was an effect that had on our town, and that happened a little over a year ago, which is why I was actually picked this to do my informative speech on, because I feel so strongly that depression and suicide should be known. There should be help services for that, is because there was a girl from my school, and her name was Katie, and she killed herself last year on May 4th. She was, like I said in the beginning, all people who genuinely are suicidal don't always look it. You wouldn't think. She was great. She was an athlete, on student council, straight A's, pretty. She had it all, but not everyone can see the hardships that everyone goes through, and that affected our town a lot. There's so much more help for these types of things, which is sad that we had to go through that to find it, but there's help for suicide prevention, there's hotlines, there's more counselors in our school, there's bullying prevention programs, and it has really opened a lot of people's eyes, and I hope that this speech helps some people know how important it is to know the facts about depression and know that it is not just something to let slide, or that's not common, or it's not serious, because it is. Um, just be sure just remember that you can always help someone, so if you are seeing the signs that I went over, to be sure to get help. Thanks.